So hello there and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast, the show where we talk all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula 1, and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending of course on which platform you choose to follow us on. And guys, I hope you are doing well. I hope you're feeling good and enjoying this little bit of an interlude that we have in the F1 season, our first one of the season before we get back racing next weekend. But F1 have announced some big news, which I think is definitely worth discussing in a bit more depth and detail. And of course, it could potentially help shift the landscape of what F1 could become in years to come, at least as far as a circuit planning is concerned. Now, of course, there's no secret as what we're talking about. We're talking about the race in Las Vegas. Last night, F1 announced, or say last night, the night before, as this comes out on Friday, I should mention, F1 announced that we're going to be having a race at Las Vegas. Now, this is not much of a secret. I think a lot of us knew that F1 were planning, whilst Liberty Media were in the sport, to have a flagship race at Las Vegas on the Strip. They finally got it done. It's finally been announced and it's going to be on the calendar for 2023. It's been mooted that it's possibly going to be in November around Thanksgiving. Apparently people have been rumored, and it's going to be on a Saturday night race as well, which is certainly going to be interesting from a European fan's perspective. We're not very used to seeing races in the early hours of a Sunday morning or an extremely late night race. Most of the time we're used to the Sunday afternoon Grand Prix with an occasional evening race when we go to South America and a few other places like that. So certainly plenty to be talking about. And of course, with this new race being announced, there's a lot of circuit congestion or calendar congestion for the F1 calendar as it is. We're certainly going to be looking forward to getting into the finer details of what this could mean for the future of the F1 calendar. Now, joining me on this episode to go into this detail a little bit more intrinsically is my colleague and DNF1 team member, Lee Wallington. So, Lee, first of all, glad to have you on board once again to discuss this topic. What did you make of the news of the Las Vegas Grand Prix? Is it one that you're going to be looking forward to? Is it one that you were surprised to actually finally see get it done?
I mean, I'm not surprised because obviously it's been rumoured in the F1 community that this announcement was coming for probably a couple of years now with Liberty Media leading on that. It probably would have happened earlier if it wasn't for COVID. That probably slowed down the discussions and negotiations. However, I'm personally not excited about it. I don't know about yourself, Adam.
I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, one thing's for sure, F1 stag parties are going to start to get a little bit more interesting. I mean, is that not a thing? I mean,
that probably will now be a thing.
I mean, someone needs to let me know. Maybe it's something that you would do with your mates if you're going to Europe or, you know, something like that for a bit of a lads' weekend on a stag party and you just happen to catch an F1 race at the same time. I'm sure there's a niche for that. But when you combine Formula 1 and Las Vegas in the same sentence, the first thing that comes to my mind is stag party. So, you know, if you've got a group of F1 mates and you happen to be getting married in the near future, perhaps around 2023 time, there you go. There's an idea. There you go, Lee. You're engaged. There's an idea for a stag party in 2023. You can go with all the boys. We'll go to Vegas. Why not? Catch an F1 race. It sounds like fun.
Thank you. But I think there's other circuits I'd rather go and watch a race at personally.
It's Vegas, baby. Why not? But look. I mean, yeah, I can understand why some fans, mostly European fans, I think it's fair to say, aren't as excited or doing backflips like I think a lot of people in the US are, and that's absolutely fine. You know, I think for us, there's a certain heritage with Formula 1 that, you know, European races have a certain pedigree to, and I think America has offered a lot to Formula 1 and motorsport in general, and it's making a huge return, mostly owing to, you know, the growing interest in America that Drive to Survive in particular has played a part in, and also, you know, other successful ventures of American interest in Formula 1. And of course, America has a rich pedigree in the sport as well. So I think that's just the modern way, a modern route that F1 is going. And of course, with the American owners, Liberty Media, it was always going to be a number one priority for them to try and drive more interest in the American market. And I feel like this is the way to do it. So I don't really have a problem with having a third American race. And bear in mind, America's a huge country. It's almost like a continent in its own right. And, you know, I apologize if it sounds like I'm butchering it, but I think there's room when you compare America, the size of America and the landmass and the interest in it to what Europe has as a continent, there's a lot of similarities to it. It is, and so I feel like there's going to be that genuine interest, and I don't blame F1 or Liberty Media for trying to cash in on that and generate interest. And I don't know, it feels like a sport as glitzy and glamorous as F1 perhaps should have a race in somewhere like Las Vegas. It seems like a natural fit. So we're certainly going to be getting that. Whether the race delivers or not, and whether the track is exciting and we get lots of overtaking or it's an incredible race to watch, that will remain to be seen. Just looking at the circuit map, and for those of you that haven't seen it, you'll be relieved to know that we're not going to be going back to Caesar's Palace car park as we did in the 80s and 81 and 82. So we're going to be having, from what I've seen in the track layout, there's 14 turns, 3.8 miles, top speeds expected to hit around 212 miles per hour on the 2-kilometer back straight going through the Vegas Strip, which is going to be covering some of the iconic landmarks, hotels and casinos. So it's going to be quite interesting. And there was a few videos of the Red Bull a few years ago, Lee, when they were driving around America, going across the strip. So it's going to be in that particular region. Have you had a look at the circuit map yet? And if so, what did you think of it? Does it give you some level of encouragement that it might be an interesting race?
I have seen the circuit map. Firstly, it reminded me a lot of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. Very grid-based, a long back straight. I don't say grid-based, right angle corners. That's what I meant by the grid-based. Or maybe left-handed corners as well. But 90-degree corners. That's a better description of the angles I was thinking about. But yeah, so that was my first impression. However, Azerbaijan, surprisingly, does actually deliver interesting, good races. However, my gut feeling is it's not going to deliver a good race, but I could be proven wrong. I was proven wrong about Azerbaijan. It just looks a very plain long straight with a few angle corners. But yeah, that's just my first impression of the plan to me.
Well, that's always one of the drawbacks that you have with trying to plan a circuit on a street. Really, you kind of are limited in a way to a lot of 90-degree corners, and obviously going within the confines of the road, you can't really make your own circuit there. In a way that you can do with Albert Park in Melbourne, for example. I think that's one of the only street circuits where you can, in theory, make a reasonable race circuit out of it.
You recall the South Korean circuit? I can't remember the name of the circuit.
Yes, the one in was it Hanoi or no, not Hanoi. That's
Hanoi,
Vietnam. No. That's Vietnam. Sorry, that's the wrong country altogether. Yeah, definitely not there. It was I'm trying to think. Was it Seoul?
Yeah, maybe it's Seoul, but I don't think it was.
Yeah, let us know, guys. I can't remember. It was that long ago, but I know what you're kind of getting at with this one.
Their plan initially was to build the circuit and then build a city around the circuit, so then they'll have a city a street Grand Prix, but it'll be an exciting Grand Prix because it's designed.
That's right. Yeah.
To be a street circuit, and then, but obviously we lost the Korean Grand Prix. But that's how you build a street circuit. You build the city around it. I mean, it makes it complete.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's certainly a lot of a lot of space in Nevada, sort of around Las Vegas, to sort of build your own circuit if you wanted to. But I mean, you try. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to try and get a Grand Prix race in Las Vegas. I mean, the interest is always going to be there. But it's one of those where you don't really want the city to pay for it too much. It almost has to pay for itself. And I think with the promotion that's going on with a circuit like this and the obvious interest to have a race at somewhere like Vegas, I think that is probably going to be how it's going to work. I mean, we were looking at it and the circuit itself. I think Baku is a very good comparison to it. A lot of emphasis on overtaking is certainly going to be across that 2-kilometer back straight between turn 9 and 11. I think those are going to be the overtaking points that people are going to be interested in. I think turn 1 and turn 5, again, almost like 90-degree corners, I think they will provide some level of overtaking opportunity. And of course, with these new cars, that should be more encouraging. I think if we had the older generation of cars, it might not necessarily be as exciting. I think you'd be like, if you get anywhere near someone on the run into turn 11, like 2 kilometers straight, there's almost a guarantee that you're going to pass them. And that's not even including DRS in the mix as well. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I want to give it a chance. I don't think it's really going to matter whether we enjoy it or not. It's going to be there for a while. Apparently, it was a 3-year deal. So we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But I'm genuinely excited and curious by Just the excitement, what it entails, and the glitz and glamour and everything else. It's going to be something. It's certainly going to be a show, and obviously being in that European audience, it's going to be a very late show for us on a Saturday night or early Sunday morning, because it's going to be on a Saturday. I think I read it was the 75th F1 race, if assuming we don't have anything in between, that doesn't take place on a Sunday. And that's quite a lot, all things considered. It's not 10% of all F1 races, but it's a sizable amount of races that we've had on the calendar that have actually, or in F1 history, that have not actually happened on a Sunday. So that was actually quite interesting to read up on. This is going to be a big test for F1's resolve in the US, to try and capitalize on their interest and demonstrate that they can have as many races as they are having in America. I don't know if 3 is going to be too many. I think we're certainly going to find out if that's going to be the case. Greg Maffei, the Liberty Media president and CEO, who was a huge orchestrator in getting this race signed off and getting it confirmed, he had a lot to say on this, and he was saying that, on the interest of F1 in America, saying our confidence in this unique opportunity is evident in our decision to assume the promoter role for the Las Vegas Grand Prix in partnership with Live Nation, of course, one of the big promoters for this event. We could not be more excited to work with our local partners to create a marquee event. The potential of Formula One has been well demonstrated over the last several seasons, and the Las Vegas Grand Prix will only take it to the next level. So, what are you expecting? Are we expecting a carnival show or anything like what we'd expect to see in Vegas at F1? Or, what can F1 add to Vegas that it doesn't already have?
What can F1 add to Vegas that it doesn't already have? Formula One cars.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't give me that one, Lee. Give me a proper answer.
Well, we know from the current US Grand Prix in Texas that they can host those are the event organisers for that Grand Prix can host a brilliant Grand Prix and put on a massive show. We know Americans from other sports series know how to put on a show for sports events. So I fully expect, being in Las Vegas, they will try to make it the biggest and best Formula One show in America, and probably in the world, because they'll try and compete with Texas and Miami and go, look, ours is better because it's Vegas, baby. And it's that kind of bravado that I think they'll put on a massive entertainment show before and after, like the venues themselves. And they obviously just hope that the race itself will be good. And then Las Vegas will be obviously hosting hopefully an exciting race.
Well, this is it. And, the more I think about it, the 3 venues in America where F1 are going, Vegas, Miami, and of course, Texas, where we've been for quite a while now, they all have their own sort of identity in terms of, what they represent to the world as a city in their own right. And the races that are going to happen, of course, we've not seen a race in Miami yet. That's going to come in May. But you already kind of get that sunny state vibe on the beaches, etc., on the street circuit there, something a bit like that. And then, of course, Vegas, you're going to have all the glitz and glamour. And then Texas is Texas, really. Anyone that lives in Texas or knows Texas inside out will know exactly what I'm talking about. And obviously how it is at the heart of motor racing, and in particular how Formula One has definitely made a very, very comfortable and lucrative home in America through that. And of course, that has helped serve as a catalyst for other Grand Prix to expand in the US. So that's only a good thing. Stefano Domenicali had a lot to say on this one, the president and CEO of Formula One, on this. This has obviously been an event that he would not have been too involved in. He sort of joined at the latter stages while most of the groundwork was already done by his predecessors. He mentioned that this was going to be an incredible moment for Formula One that demonstrates the huge appeal and growth of our sport with a 3rd race in the US. Las Vegas is a destination known around the world for its excitement, hospitality, thrills, and of course the famous Strip. There is no better place for Formula One to race than in the global entertainment capital of the world, and we cannot wait to be here next year. So a lot of positive noises coming out of F1. It's an event that they very much wanted to get on the calendar. It's now going to happen. And again, Lee, that they cite how significant the interest of the US market, how critical it is to establish that they can have 3 races on the calendar. And based on already the stuff that I was saying about how there were different identities to each different American circuit, are we right in thinking that perhaps this could be a success, or do you feel that perhaps F1 are running a bit too much before they can walk, as if only perhaps just dip their toes into the waters of the American market, and obviously they want to try and get as much out of it as they can, I guess.
I think it's probably a bit too early considering we don't know how Miami's going to go. But I think the interest in the US has changed completely in the last few years, or level of interest, I should say. I think back to was it 2006, that famous Indianapolis moment with the 6 cars on the grid? Was it 2006?
Yeah, that's the one. Oh, no, 2006? No, 2005, wasn't it? 'Cause it was
2005,
the
I
one,
was a year
yeah,
out.
because it was like the only race that Michael won that year, wasn't it? Because the Ferrari was terrible, and obviously,
Yeah.
didn't really count, but...
But what thank you for the correction. The point I was trying to make is back then, well, it's 15 years ago or 17 years ago, it was, the interest wasn't that big. Indianapolis was cancelled a few years after. And then there's we need a US Grand Prix to come back. And then obviously Austin stepped up. And it's like, will this be the home of the F1 in America? And it was, it's proven a success. And now with, as you said, Drive to Survive, it's just completely reinvigorated the interest. And I think having 2 Grand Prix, 3 Grand Prix is, I think the appetite is there. I have a friend that actually lives in Las Vegas who also watches Formula One. And the excitement in the local community, as he's described to me, it's just, they're over the moon of having the Formula One come to Las Vegas. So I think there's a lot of appetite locally within the city and excitement for it to come. At least that's what I've been informed. So yeah, I think it will be a good event. I just hope the racing is going to be exciting.
Well, that's the most important thing. It doesn't really matter. I mean, well, I say it doesn't really matter. Of course, we've just come from Saudi Arabia, which has presented its own issues for Formula One, which don't really sit well with a lot of people watching the sport for different reasons. But of course, F1 takes F1 where it needs to go, and they feel that they're trying to make an impact at some of these venues. And of course, it remains to be seen if that's going to be the case. But Las Vegas itself, it presents a very, very different issue. Now, I think a lot of the problems that going to a third Grand Prix in the US in 2023 is going to create is, it means that there's going to be more congestion in an otherwise very congested calendar. We had Stefano Domenicali already talking about the possibility of having 30 races on the F1 calendar. Now, I don't know if he was actually serious in that, but this is someone that's obviously saying that there's a lot of interest from a lot of other circuits, and I genuinely believe that to be the case. And that they could, if they wanted to, in theory, host 30 Grand Prix on the F1 calendar, although that is very, very impractical and controversial owing to the constraints it would have on the teams, the personnel, and, I don't think fans really want to see that many races as well. There can be sometimes too much of a good thing. So I guess it kind of creates a problem that I think some people talk, and I don't necessarily think this is like just European fans having a moan saying, oh, here we go, another race in the US. Why are we having so many races in one country? Why not have a race in somewhere like Africa? Albeit, I think that's a fair point. I think why are F1 not looking to have a race in Africa right now? They want to call it a world championship. That would be the place I would go. And I know a lot of people throw up Kyalami in South Africa as the prime venue for that. Where is your head at, Lee, in terms of F1's current direction for future Grand Prix? Do you feel that perhaps they're more interested in trying to cash in on certain markets, or do you and perhaps in the process trying to alienate the European market that currently already exists and in a way is still the core market in Formula One? Where is your head at with this one in terms of what's F1's direction? Do you think that they're doing the right thing, or do you feel that perhaps they should be focusing on some other areas as well to try and preserve that pedigree and integrity of a world championship?
Personally, I think it's probably they're doing the slightly wrong thing. Formula One has always been about money speaks. At the end of the day, Formula One is a business, and they need to make a profit, and therefore increase profit margins, etc., etc. So going to tracks and countries that are willing to pay higher fees increases profit margin. So kind of going towards countries like in the Middle East, for example, that are willing to pay higher fees. That's why we've gone from having one race with Bahrain being the first race in the Middle East to now have, well, last year we had 4, if I'm correct, top of my head.
I think it was
I'm
4,
just making sure I hadn't missed one. So 4.
We did. Was it Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and Bahrain?
Yeah. So that's a massive improvement in a space of another 15 years from 0 to 4, and that's just down to the money aspect. So obviously the US being the number 1 economy in the world, obviously is a lot more money it's going around if they can capture the market. So obviously Liberty Media, who are obviously the owning company for Formula One, are interested in capturing the market, especially it isn't an American company as well. So they fully understand it better than the previous administration, Bernie Ecclestone, who owned Formula One, being an old boy European as well, so doesn't completely understand the American market. So it does feel like Liberty Media this is a completely neglected part of the Formula One market that Formula's just ignored because it just had no interest in going there. But I wouldn't be surprised if we, as you said, get more races in China, because obviously the Chinese economy, and especially Guangzhou Zhou, I've said his name correctly, if he actually becomes successful in Formula One and it builds up a following fan base, then that's it. Well, you need to capture the Chinese market and develop that interest. So I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing more races coming from emerging markets that are offering the higher buck, basically.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing that F1 are exploring newer markets. I mean, as you said, growing up, when we were watching Formula One, we were growing up, it was a lot of races were European, and in a way, the largest section of races in one continent is still the European one. So it's not like it's a completely isolated market where they're just taking races away. You know, it's got to come from somewhere. F1 has always had interest in Asia because there's always been an interest in racing in those parts of the world, and it still is maintained. You know, so, and it was only a couple of years ago that, of course, because of the constraints of COVID, that most of the season was in Europe in that really strange season in 2020. So I can understand from both sides where the concerns may be, from their own perspective. I think it is important for Formula One to expand into the American region. I think it's a market, as you said, back in the Bernie Ecclestone days, that he felt that obviously it was more work than it was worth, and they had the race at Indianapolis for so many years, but it only generated so much interest. So I can understand why, especially after 2005, whilst that started to fizzle out. And we're talking about a country that's had so much rich racing history, with the Indy 500, arguably the biggest racing event of the year around the world. You've also got, the NASCAR series, you've got the Indy Championship, let's not forget that, and Club Car Championship, all, so much that goes on, and I'm sure American fans that listen to this will probably be naming a few more in the comments section. That's absolutely fine. So I don't see any problem with F1 going down this avenue. I do think perhaps 3 races is probably the limit. I think, anymore, and you think you're just going to start turning it into an American series, which of course I don't think is going to happen, but I think there is genuinely that fear from some fans in Europe that probably feel that that's the case. And it's a world championship. F1 have to explore those avenues, but of course, there are going to be some that face the cut, because right now we're in a situation, Lee, where before the Russian Grand Prix was removed, we had 23 races on the calendar. We may still get a 23rd race. There's been rumours saying that Qatar is the most likely venue for that. Not necessarily Doha, which they planned for 2023, perhaps going back to the Losail circuit that we had last season, because we've got a World Cup for football coming up at the end of 2022, so they can't really, put a race in Doha at the moment at that time. So with that all being said, the maximum races, I believe, from the Concord Agreement is 24 for the current one. So we can't really be in a position where we can just keep adding races to the calendar, and F1 would find that rather impractical. It would be a nightmare for everybody logistically as well. It wasn't long ago, a few years ago before COVID happened, that there was F1 released a news piece where they were actually putting a structure out of where we were going to go in certain parts of the season. We were going to go to America, we were going to go to Europe, we were going to go to Asia and back to Europe or Africa and stuff like that. And obviously that got put to the wayside because of COVID. So we may end up returning to something like that in the future to ease things logistically. But I want to bring it back as well to Liberty Media on this, because not long ago we were talking about what races have been introduced since Liberty Media have come into Formula One. And I believe, unless I'm mistaken, there's about 7 of them. And that is, and it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't think the history of Liberty Media and what races they've put on the Formula One Canada has suggested that they have a direct path through. I just think it's when a needs must, they serve a certain purpose. So, for example, they brought back Zandvoort, which was a historic race, a bit of nostalgia then. Of course, they were going to cash in on the Max Verstappen hype, and I don't see that circuit going anywhere anytime soon for that reason. The world champion needs a home race. I think that's only fair. And then, of course, what was the other nostalgic race? I had this in my mind. Imola, that's it. Imola came back a couple of years ago, to be on the Canada help out during COVID. That's now become a permanent fixture on the Canada. More recently, we've had Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which have come in during the plight of F1's financial crisis because of COVID, where they lost up to £900 million in 2020. So they needed to put those mega deals in, those billion-pound deals to try and keep F1 afloat and F1 going the way that it was. It was really critical. So that's why we've got those races. And now we've got races in Miami and Las Vegas, which are going to be destination races, like home races, and of course places that you want to go, like in America, those kind of venues that you want to go to have a good time and catch an F1 race, stuff like that. So based on that history, and let's not forget Vietnam, which was a non-starter really, but we would have gone there a couple of years ago as well. Whilst we're saying that Liberty Media might not necessarily be focusing on the world championship scene in terms of like other races in other areas like Africa and Kyalami, for example, which I think a lot of us would want to see, it seems that they're chasing the markets. History would suggest so far that Liberty Media are sort of going in stages right now. So it's not necessarily meaning that they're going to keep going for more races in America or chasing money venues, but they could be looking at expanding in other demographics as well. It's just a sort of process right now.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. So they have obviously a long-term business plan where they want to take Formula One. If it is actually as 30 races as mentioned previously, I wouldn't be surprised if that's their goal. Obviously, more tracks, more money coming into the sport. Once again, higher profit margin. So, yeah, I'm sure that they've got the plan of where they want to expand that. But obviously, you do have untapped markets, and the untapped markets is where you get the greatest potential. Being an African race, but probably more than one. Africa probably wants more than one race as a continent. So there probably will be a lot more moving around of circuits in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, let me know, guys, if you know of other grade 1 circuits in Africa that would obviously be interested in hosting an F1 race. I mean, there's nothing that I can do about it. It's just more for my own curiosity, because the only one that I've heard touted around is Kyalami in South Africa, but I'm pretty sure there are other places that you can go to. I mean, I've got the quote here, actually, what Stefano Domenicali was talking about with the 30 races. I'll read it for the benefit of those of you that haven't heard it. But he said that that there is a big interest for new places or old places to be part of our calendar. And I think that they'll, with no doubt, without any kind of limitation that is correct to keep, there could be easily over 30 venues that we could do a deal with tomorrow, but we cannot go in this direction. So, you know, we were saying earlier that 30 races would be insane. F1 honestly doesn't feel that 30 races is possible. It's just something that's been mooted. But at the moment, we kind of end up in a situation where we've got 23 races. If you include all the races that currently exist and none of them were removed, if you add in Las Vegas and you add in you add in the possibility of Qatar as well, that's going to be coming in 2023, you've already gone over that 24 race limit on the Canada. And that's, of course, with Russia being removed altogether. So you're already over that limit. And then, not to mention, you've got a second Chinese race, which, as you mentioned already, is something that F1 are going to be looking to try and produce because of the influence of Zhou Guanyu, the first Chinese driver in Formula One. And that's a huge market that F1 have not really been able to tap into, despite having a Chinese Grand Prix on the Canada, I think, since, 2004? So they're definitely going to want to cash in on that market as well. I mean, and they tried to do the same thing in India before that got pulled, but you never know, they might return there one day if possible. So they're already there. That's before you go any further and you include, let's say, Kailami, for example, in Africa and China, a second Chinese race. You've got 27 Grand Prix with Russia removed. It's just not possible to get them all on. So unfortunately, that means that some races are going to face the chop at the moment. And that is quite a worrying time, because I think a lot of us that, and again, this is probably a Eurocentric perspective, that a lot of us F1 fans in that region that obviously hold a certain amount of prestige, heritage and pedigree to some circuits, there is a risk that some of them could face the chop. I mean, what are your thoughts on that one, Lee? Are you worried that that's where F1's direction is going to go, that rather than expand the calendar, they're going to look at chopping some races that have obviously held a previous heritage with F1?
I reckon it's very likely that some European circuits will be given the chop. Not necessarily. It may even be some circuits that are very popular with fans will be given the chop as well. And one of the circuits that's coming up this year to end their current contracts is Spa. But Spa is such a popular circuit with a lot of fans. So if that was given the chop, that may be an unpopular decision with the fans, but it makes room. Obviously, there are other circuits that are given the chop. That's just the hypothetical situation. Well, you may see the rise of rotating circuits to give some variety in the season, which I probably wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some circuits rotating.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that F1 are going to have to introduce. I mean, a lot of people said it's probably the best likely solution, because they don't want to get rid of certain Grand Prix, or fans don't want certain races to go. But, you may be forced into a position where they have to rotate to make sure that they've got the right amount of races on the calendar and that certain Grand Prix are not excluded completely. I mean, I was doing a little bit of research on this, and as I said, Belgium is one race at the moment that is currently out of contract. France, another one, and also the Mexican Grand Prix. So it could potentially be one, if not two, of those races that are going to be bumped from the calendar as early as next season. I'm, for those of you that are concerned about this, from what I understand, there's not really been any indication that the Mexican Grand Prix is actually under threat. They've gone through a new business restructure recently, and whilst they're looking to do a deal for 2022 onwards, that nothing has been said that's not going to be on the calendar. So I don't think the Mexican Grand Prix is seriously under threat, which leaves us with the likes of Belgium and France. And Lee, if I was a betting man right now, I think the first race that is going to be chopped or rotated is the French Grand Prix. We've been there since 2018 at Paul Ricard. There's been incredible logistic issues. I remember in 2018, the parking was so bad that a lot of fans missed a lot of the sessions that was going on. The racing itself was not that exciting. I could probably think of less than a handful of exciting moments that we've had at Paul Ricard since we've been there, and most of them probably from last season. And I don't really see that changing. I don't really think the racing is going to get much better. So with all that being said, with all due respect to our French followers or anyone that follows Formula 1 that likes the French Grand Prix, I just don't feel that there's going to be much of a future in the long run for the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard. What are your thoughts on that one? Do you agree with that, or do you feel that perhaps there's still a future left for that particular venue?
I would have agreed with the lackluster racing at Paul Ricard. There's been very boring races. It's probably been up there with Monaco regarding one of the most boring races of the season.
Well, that's another race that's under threat as well, we should mention as well. But
yeah, so I'll let you get back to that in a second. But the Paul Ricard, or Millie, the new regulations may make the racing exciting, although I doubt they will be too exciting at Paul Ricard. I mean, personally, as a French Grand Prix, I'd much rather return to Magny-Cours.
I loved Magny-Cours.
That was a lot more interesting and entertaining to watch. back in the day. So I would much prefer it to move back to that circuit personally. But it's a very wait and see how it goes this year with the new regulations. But I fully expect that there'll probably be there either cease to hold a race or there'll be some rotation.
Yeah, I always like Magny-Cours. I think the problem with Magny-Cours now for modern Formula 1 is that the track is a bit too narrow. So I don't think it would work with modern Formula 1 cars. I mean, remember the older days, like F1 cars used to be as big as a toaster and about as light as one as well. So, that was fine, but I think it's probably a bit too narrow for modern day F1. I mean, I say that, we still race at Imola, but Imola kind of works in that regard. But yeah, as I was saying already, Monaco is a race now that is seriously underfed. I mean, and this is crazy because this is the Grand Prix venue that has always been the crown jewel of F1. It's always been the race that everybody's wanted to win. It's always had that high prestige. It's very rarely produced an incredibly exciting Grand Prix. I mean, people still talk about Senna Mansell in 92 with excitement. 2016, 2018, I should mention, like with Hamilton and Verstappen, and other races like that. But and 96, of course, with Olivier Panis in the Ligier in 1996. So there's only been a handful of races that have been actually really, truly excited at Monaco. And now Monaco, after this season, is not going to enjoy that paid race status. It's now going to have to put forward a hosting fee. So F1 are now asking money for Monaco to host a Grand Prix. And, I mean this in the nicest way possible. I just can't see how Monaco is going to prove to be a race that's going to fit with modern F1. It has more pedigree than arguably any other venue on the calendar for obvious reasons. But at the same time, these cars are getting bigger. Monaco's not getting bigger with that. So it's almost going to be a point where the race could literally be won, if it isn't already, by qualifying. So, I mean, if Monaco was to be removed from the calendar, Lee, would you miss it? Would you be disappointed?
I mean, Monaco is a very sore subject, at least for me. I love watching the qualifying in Monaco because of obviously just the skill to go through that narrow track and the walls. It's just wonderful to watch, especially when you get a brilliant lap put together by one of the drivers. The racing there is very boring to be put, but unless it rains, the racing is not very entertaining. But still to watch it because it's Monaco. It's the Formula One's at Monaco. This is great. Just wish it was more exciting. And even with the new regulations, I doubt Monaco's going to be exciting just because I don't think it's going to be still no easy for the drivers to overtake around the confines of Monaco. So it will be a loss for the sport as a whole, being the history and the legacy with this losing such a circuit. But I think there's probably more entertaining races out there to have for the fans to watch. So it is a very, as I said, sore spot regarding what to do with Monaco.
Yeah, it's always a tough one because I love the Monaco Grand Prix for the spectacle. But I'll be lying to you if I told you I've enjoyed the show in anywhere near equal measure to it. Sometimes, as I said, the excitement in Monaco can come from qualifying because that is where the guys are pushing to the absolute limit, getting as close to the walls as possible. And as we saw last season, Charles Leclerc, who was on pole position, although didn't start the race, pushed too much and he wasn't able to start the race as a result. So the pole position was completely pointless. It's so hard to defend having Monaco on the calendar if it has to bump up a fee for all the other reasons mentioned. I mean, Domenicali himself, he said that, the current crop of Grand Prix, plural, mind you, aren't safe and might not be on the calendar going forward. And pedigree alone and F1 heritage is not enough now to save a Grand Prix, whereas in the past it would be a no-brainer to have the Belgian Grand Prix on the calendar or the German Grand Prix on the calendar or the Monaco Grand Prix on the calendar, one of which is currently not on the calendar, and we don't know when that's going to come back anytime soon. I can't see when the German Grand Prix is going to come back unless it becomes one of those races that, as you mentioned, Lee, that rotates every other year on the calendar. And even in the past, we've had that with Germany, where we've had to rotate, whether it's on the calendar or not, and rotate between venues, between Hockenheim and the Nürburgring. So it's definitely getting to a point now where the landscape of F1 is changing because of these new races coming in, whether it be for money, for destination, or to serve a current purpose like what Zandvoort does, where it's a race that no one would have even considered putting on the calendar 10 years ago. But now you've got the world champion in Max Verstappen, who generates a huge fan base and interest in Holland, and also the Belgian fans as well, because he's part Belgian. That is obviously something that F1 cannot ignore and have to facilitate to. And then perhaps in 10, 15 years' time, when Max is no longer in F1, that may go away and they may not race at Zandvoort anymore. So it's all about fitting in with what F1 is currently going through, the modern F1, if you like, and that will always change in terms of the landscape. So, I mean, what are you talking about the Belgian Grand Prix before we move on to the final part, obviously? Belgium is one that I think has the best chance of trying to keep itself on the calendar within their own control, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. I mean, Belgium has a history of it being a very dangerous circuit and sometimes being accused of being out of touch of Formula One, particularly with the Eau Rouge Radion section, which has caused so many accidents. I mean, we saw last year in the rain that Lando Norris obviously had that big crash. He was okay. Recently, it took the life of Antoine Hubert in the F2 race a few years ago, and this is something that unfortunately we're not surprised to see in big accidents in that area. Since then, of course, the Belgian Grand Prix organisers have gone for a massive redevelopment of that area to make it a bit more safer. That being said, it's still more facilitated to the idea of bringing in MotoGP races there in the future, not necessarily catering to what Formula One wants, which is obviously a bit of a red flag in terms of wanting to try and preserve its F1 future. But then, of course, you need the extra money that's going to come with hosting fees probably going up at venues to try and compete with each other, to try and actually get a race on at their circuit year on year. The infrastructure, with all due respect to everyone at Spa, who I'm sure work really, really hard to put these races on as best as they can. I remember going there 20 years ago when I went to watch the Belgian Grand Prix back in 2001. From what I've heard, the infrastructure is around the circuit in the Ardennes Forest has not necessarily improved that much. It's still one of those circuits that I think is not quite in touch with other circuit facilities in F1, which of course needs to be improved. And it's those kind of things that put it at risk. So with all that being said, Lee, what do you think for the future of the Belgian Grand Prix? Is it now no longer able to enjoy that untouchable status that it perhaps once had?
I think it would have been helpful if Max had chose to race under the Belgian flag and not the Dutch flag, and then we wouldn't be having this discussion about Spa.
No, that's true. Absolutely right. I think they wouldn't have dared to have done it. I mean, of course, they would have, made sure they made the changes to make it more safer, but they wouldn't get rid of a Grand Prix of a driver of Max Verstappen's caliber and interest from the fans. They wouldn't even dare to try and remove it.
So I wanted to say that light-hearted joke, but yeah, I think with Spa, you're right that it's probably the most likely one out of the potential circuits to get renewed regarding obviously the historic circuits. I think it's more likely than Monaco. However, we may see it on a rotation. One of the things I have seen in the past, although it's probably unlikely at the moment, is to rotate with Zandvoort. Just because obviously the proximity of Belgium and the Netherlands. They used to have a Max Verstappen Grand Prix either way, because even before we had Zandvoort, it was a Max Verstappen orange all around.
It was Austria, wasn't it? And Austria as well.
Yeah, and Austria. Yeah. So yeah, he had two home Grand Prix. So yeah, I think it's very unlikely. Although I do agree that Spa has to invest in the infrastructure. And we know Formula One do sometimes make that conditions on renewing circuits to invest in the infrastructure, be it on the circuit, around the circuit, or even get into the circuit. There are demands. I think there was obviously, is it the Brazilian Grand Prix? They had to look at upgrading their facilities. I know Monaco had to look at upgrading their facilities. I don't know if that was a few years ago or that's coming.
It's funny about Brazil because it's one of those circuits at Interlagos where they always talk about moving it from the F1 calendar and put in a race in Rio or somewhere else like that. And yet time and time again, I'm baffled as to why they'd want to put that race somewhere else. I mean, I can understand if they were thinking, oh, perhaps we don't need to have it on the calendar for safety reasons or because the interest isn't as good as it used to be, but it always comes up with some exciting races and some, I mean, like what we saw last season, which always seems to keep it on the calendar. It's like it has to fight for its life every year, and then it tends to deliver when it's on the ropes. It's quite astounding. I don't see many races like that, to be honest, when it's in that position. They always seem to deliver.
Yeah, I think with Interlagos, it's a well-designed circuit, which makes the races entertaining. The microclimate being where it's located obviously helps. And I think it's a lot of political posturing between Formula One and other cities, but I don't think they'll walk away just because of the size of the popularity of the Sao Paulo circuit with locals and international fans.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I don't see any reason why that would change. But of course, as I said, there are going to be some more circuits now that we haven't even considered that could be under threat in the future. I mean, most circuits that have an option for 2022 onwards, they are going to be exercising that just to preserve their place on the calendar. But there could be some under serious threat in the future. I mean, in your mind, Lee, are there any races that still exist on the F1 calendar which still retain that untouchable status?
There's probably two that are, I would never say untouchable, but are more likely to be towards the end of untouchable. I don't think any circuit is safe anymore, but I would have said it's Silverstone and Monza.
Oh, yeah. I'd go as far as say that those are untouchable.
I don't think they're untouchable.
I think they are. I mean, no, fair enough, but I understand what you mean. I don't know.
You recall a few years ago, obviously there was the whole debacle about Silverstone, the British Grand Prix of Silverstone had been cancelled, and it was moving further. Was it further north to?
Well, they wanted to go back to Donington, didn't they?
Yeah, I was at Donington Park.
Yeah.
And then obviously the circuit wasn't ready, so it went back to Silverstone.
Yeah, that was always a bit silly. I mean, I can understand that. And I think this was before the major upgrades that went on at Silverstone to sort of preserve it there. And it is the home of British racing. And obviously, being British, having that British bias that we always tend to have on this show, apparently, it's one of those that I just can't see why not just Silverstone, but the British Grand Prix would not be on the calendar. And again, look, I can absolutely understand that Britain is not the biggest fan base in Formula One. It isn't. We already established in the past that Germany had the biggest fan base in F1, and look what happened to their circuit. But it's one of those that I don't know. There's just so many things about the British Grand Prix, the caliber of British drivers coming through all the time, and the interest in it that just makes it so special for F1, and it feels like the home of F1. And again, look, I apologize if it comes across as I'm being biased on this one, but I do feel that, and a lot of people probably tell you, people that aren't British, that if you think of F1 and think of where its home lies, the Silverstone or the British Grand Prix is probably one of the places that that can lay a claim to that. I think Monza as well is another circuit I just think is absolutely untouchable. I think if we talk about the heritage of the British Grand Prix or Silverstone, Monza's heritage outweighs almost every other, with the exception of arguably Monaco to a degree as well. I think F1's oldest race at Monza as well. So, and obviously the strong connections with Ferrari, which of course we've argued in the past on this podcast how significant Ferrari is to Formula One. I think it's the only entity within a sport that you could argue to a degree is almost as big, if not perhaps bigger, than the sport in terms of what they offer and the magnitude of what they offer to the sport. So I just can't see how the Italian Grand Prix at Monza would ever seriously be considered under threat. You hear stories, but I couldn't imagine an F1 season that doesn't have the British Grand Prix or the Italian Grand Prix on there at all. I just can't. But let us know, guys, other circuits that you think might be untouchable. I think it's really only those two, with all respect. Belgium used to be one, but I don't think that's the case anymore. Before we round this off, Lee, I'm going to put an unpopular question to you. Are there any circuits, other than the ones that we've already talked about, that you feel F1 should look at potentially removing to make room for a few other ones? And of course, which other ones would you like to see introduced in its place?
Well, personally, I would too strong emotion. I would like for Saudi Arabia to be removed.
Yeah, fair enough.
Admittedly, Qatar's new circuit of next year, to where you see how that is, but I wasn't convinced with the circuit plan personally. So I think those two were probably the circuits that I would say to remove. The French Grand Prix, I'll probably actually say to remove that as well, just because it's boring races historically. And I know it's probably more European centric, so I do apologise to any of the fans we have outside of Europe. But we have great circuits at Portimao. I thoroughly enjoyed when we were at Portimao. Istanbul Park. I really enjoy Istanbul Park.
I love Istanbul. I think it's one of my favourite circuits. I'm not a big fan of Portimao though. I really not. I know what the interest and appeal of it is because of so close to the Sea of the Algarve, and it kind of creates those strange conditions on circuit. I'm just not won over by it. I think it's a race that is more fun to watch in qualifying than a Grand Prix.
Yeah. I would probably actually agree with you, but I actually enjoyed Portimao quite a bit when we had it back.
It's just you want to see F1 sliding about, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You just enjoy the chaos, Lee.
that pit straight crash. Oh, that was hilarious.
Oh, not the crash so much. It was just the car sliding. You know, it's in that first sector where it sort of goes off bank, and then it's like the one that sort of made people spin around. Like it was just stuff like that, really. I think it was a couple of years ago where Carlos Sainz in the McLaren on the soft tyres ended up passing both Mercedes because they were on cold tyres and couldn't get them warmed up, and everyone just went mad. And then a lap or two when the tyres warmed up, like the status quo resumed, but it was fun to watch.
And then circuit-wise, I would actually like when the German Grand Prix come back. I do enjoy Hockenheim or Nürburgring. Although condition on that, if Mick Schumacher's career kicks off, I think the Schumacher name will bring back the German fans and we'll have a German Grand Prix. For whatever reason, Sebastian Vettel, Nico Rosberg, the last German champions, didn't attract the German fan base, same as Michael Schumacher. And I think a Schumacher name will bring back the fans back to have a circuit in Germany again.
Yeah. I think if Schumacher ends up in a big team, which at this rate could the most likely destination is obviously Ferrari for its connections. But if that does happen, I think we will have a German Grand Prix. Definitely agree with that.
And the last circuit would be Sepang. I actually really enjoyed Sepang.
I loved Sepang in Malaysia. I loved it.
Yeah.
Great circuit. And again, it was its own microclimate. It was absolute chaos.
Yeah.
Sometimes there. You'd have like 35-degree heat, then showers going all over the place, not obviously storms and stuff like that, and then go back to sun, and that's all in like half an hour. It's absolutely crazy stuff in there. It's literally the definition of a circuit to where to be on the right tire at the right time, as Ayrton Senna often said. I think a lot of those circuits they make a lot of sense. As I said, I'm not the biggest fan of Portimao. I don't know. I think it's as I said, it's a MotoGP circuit. I'm not a big fan of it. The Losail circuit was okay. I'm not quite sure what Doha's going to be, so I'm not really fussed about that. Saudi Arabia, I can agree that one can get in the bin. I've not been a fan of that one. I think it's one of those that is hyped up a lot because of how fun it is to watch in qualifying and the DRS sections, as we saw at the last weekend's Grand Prix. But I think it's a bit too dangerous for modern Formula One, and sometimes that can be a little bit uncomfortable to watch to a degree. This one's going to make me unpopular with some fans. I'm not a big fan of Catalonia. I think that's a circuit.
That's unpopular.
In your camp it might be, but look. Don't get me wrong. I think there should be a Spanish Grand Prix on the calendar. I really do, but I don't think people can come at me and say, "Oh well, Spain holds a pedigree because of his F1 history, world champions." I said, "Well, but no more than somewhere like America or Italy." I mean, I remember right. Italy, I think only has one world champion in Ascari.
Yeah,
and not Ascari, and is it Fangio as well?
No, Fangio is Argentinian.
Oh, of course he is. Oh, well, that's it. Adam's cancelled. For some reason, I thought I forget he's Argentinian. I always make that mistake with Fangio. Yeah, absolute fraud watch. But yeah, they've had one world champion, Italy. So, but it's not the same. You can't really make that argument for that logic. With Spain, I think there should be a Grand Prix in Spain. I just don't think it should be at Catalonia. I think it's a boring race most years. I really do. We do get the odd exception. Don't get me wrong, but I just think it's a circuit that I just think is more of a test circuit. And perhaps because it's a test circuit, you get the teams are so optimized with their setups on their cars to the points where it just becomes a bit of a procession. So I'm not really a big fan of that place. What other circuits do I think could do with being rotated or getting the chop? It's a bit brutal, isn't it? I feel like you've picked most of them, the ones that...
Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. I mean, I wouldn't mind if they rotated Shanghai and another... I mean, it's a good circuit, don't get me wrong, but if you want to have like different Chinese races, fair enough. But if they got another good circuit in China, I think they could rotate there to try and make a bit of room. As I said, the Dutch Grand Prix is fine, but it's only going to be there for as long as Max Verstappen is relevant in Formula 1. I think the moment he leaves Formula 1, I think they'll look to get rid of it. I'm sorry, Dutch fans. I know you love Max, and don't get me wrong. I love the atmosphere, and I love the Dutch. I love the passion of the Dutch fans. I love what they've brought to Formula 1. But I just can't see a Dutch Grand Prix after Max Verstappen leaves F1. If there is another one in the wings, fair enough. I'd like to see a race in Finland. That would be a cool place to go. There's a few tracks there in Finland I've heard they're actually pretty decent. I'd like to see F1 go to there. Trying to think what else. What else could I think of? I can't think of any other places I think I'd get rid of. I think I'd end up completely isolating all of our fan bases in one go by saying what circuits I don't want to go to. So I'm going to leave it there, guys, and I'm going to leave it up to you in the comment section. After putting in Adam is a fraud in there for not remembering where Fangio is from. That's an absolute cardinal sin for a veteran F1 fan. But let me know in the comment section what you think of the Las Vegas news. Are you excited to see America have another race in F1? Do you feel that perhaps that F1 are focusing too much on one particular market and rather should expand in other places around the world? What circuits would you like to see on the F1 calendar? And of course, what races do you want to see removed from the F1 calendar that are currently on there as well? Got to have a special mention for Kyle Army once again. I think that should be on there. F1's got to go to Africa at some point. Why not there? It's a great place. Why not go there? So let us know what you think. And as always, guys, if you have enjoyed this episode of the podcast, make sure to like the video if you're watching us on YouTube and consider subscribing to the channel. And of course, if you're following us on your favorite podcasting platform, do consider following us and giving us a like on there. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or iTunes and you can give us a 5-star review, please do consider giving us one. If you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode of the podcast as a little thank you for that as well. But until next time, where we'll be doing the Australian Grand Prix review next week. I almost forget where we're going next. It's been a while since we've been to Melbourne, so forgive me on that one. But until next time, guys, stay safe, please take care, and thank you so much for listening to the episode of the podcast. We will see you in the very next one. Take care.
Goodbye.